that's the magic pill, quite frankly, of dealing with stress and everything else in life. If you're not getting good sleep, it has such a huge ripple effect on your life and every aspect of it.
Hey, everybody, welcome back to the show. And as I promise you with every episode, I've got another amazing success story. I've got Michael Levitt on the show today. Michael, thank you so much for joining me.
Great to be with you today, Mike.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about he's got a phenomenal background and a phenomenal story. And I'm really, really psyched because we've been waiting a long time to do this. So I'm really, really psyched to get into it. But before I do, I want to tell you a little bit about Michael so you know who he is before we get started. So Michael Levitt is the founder and chief burnout officer, this is the first time I've ever heard that, of the Breakfast Leadership Network, a San Diego and Toronto-based burnout media firm. He is an in-person and certified virtual speaker, a certified NLP, which is neuro-linguistic programming, I think. Is that right?
Correct.
And CBT therapist. I don't know what CBT is. What is that, Michael?
Cognitive behavioral therapy.
Okay, cool. And is one of the world's leading authorities in burnout recovery and prevention. He is a Fortune 500 consultant, #1 bestselling author, and host of the Breakfast Leadership Show, a top 200 podcast on Apple Podcasts. Congratulations on that. That's a feat.
Thank you.
He is a 3-time top 20 global thought leader on culture with Thinkers 360. Michael is a former healthcare executive, CIO, and CFO, overseeing $2 billion budgets. So he's seen and done it all. You can find out more about Michael at breakfastleadership.com, which is his website. And you can also buy Michael's 3 books, Burnout Proof, 369 Days, and Burnout on Amazon or wherever you buy your books. And give his podcast a listen, the Breakfast Leadership Network show on Apple or wherever you get your podcasts. I've done so. I got a tremendous value out of it, and I think you would as well. So, Michael, I start every show with the same simple question, and that is, how did it happen for you?
A simple question, very complex answer, but I'll summarize it briefly. Tragedy creates opportunity. A very tragic situation in my life due to burnout, which we'll talk about a bit, has created a career for me and a different path for my life and for my business. And life is absolutely amazing for me. And I don't think I could have designed a better life for me if I hadn't gone through what I had to go through. You know, everybody has challenges in life, and the key is to take those challenges, learn from them, and use the opportunities that they present in a way for you to move forward. And that's what I've done.
So you made it sound really easy there. And having read some of what you've been through, I know that it probably wasn't as easy as you just described it being. And what's got me fascinated is that most people who go through bad streaks of luck or experiences or whatever, they focus on the bad and they lose the lesson of the good that came from the experience. So I want to dig in more to the actual, what led to this sort of transformational thinking on your part.
Mm-hmm.
And you can start me wherever that actually started. I know where you talk about it, but I don't know if that's where it started or if it started, way before that or something.
Yeah, I think, well, we're not going to go all the way back to, childhood or anything like that. I had an amazing childhood. My parents were absolutely amazing, and I have zero complaints or trauma from my childhood. I'm very, very fortunate when it comes to that. And they did everything that they could to make sure that I was set up for success best they could as parents, and that's, I think, all we can ever hope for as parents, is to give our kids a fighting chance to succeed in whatever way they choose to succeed. So life was great. Had an interesting career, a lot of startup work, worked in finance and IT, and then in 2007 was hired as a healthcare executive for a startup healthcare organization in Windsor, Ontario, Canada. I had immigrated to Canada in 2004 with my former wife, and also became a citizen in 2011. So originally from Michigan, immigrated to Canada, became a citizen. So I'm a dual Canadian and American citizen. So I like to
Mhm.
joke that I can vote and screw up two countries.
Good
And
for you.
then I leave it at there. I don't tell people who I vote for because half your audience would be mad at me, or depending on the demographics. But typically, half the population would be mad at me. So I don't want that. So I just don't. I don't tell people who I vote for.
Okay.
But
I won't ask.
I ultimately this role was interesting because I had a ton of startup experience, but I never worked in healthcare before. I was always a user of the healthcare system occasionally, but never worked in it. So I didn't really know a lot about it. But the organization brought me on because they knew that I had a ton of business experience and finance and IT and startup experience, which was very helpful. But unfortunately, the hours that were required in this role were pretty heavy. I basically worked from 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. 7 days a week for a solid 2 years, and that took a big toll on me. I wasn't taking care of myself. I wasn't getting any exercise to speak of. Because you're working that many hours, you're not able to do things in life you like to do, like going to baseball games or going out to dinner with friends or things like that. Because if you're working all those hours, a little difficult to do so. And sometimes I could take a break and not work a particular evening and do some things. But by then, you're just, even though you're physically there, you're not.
You're
You're
drained.
mentally drained.
Mhm.
You're tired. You're just not in the moment. And that proceeded over a couple of years. My nutrition plan pretty much was breakfast, lunch, and dinner, ordering through a microphone, driving around the corner, paying for the food, and then getting handed a brown bag. I'll let you figure out what kind of food that was.
Mhm.
It wasn't healthy. So obviously that takes a toll on your health as well, lack of exercise and everything else. And it all came to a crashing halt in May of 2009. It was a Monday evening in May, and I was mowing my front lawn. And our lawn wasn't that big, and gas prices were pretty expensive back then, as they are at the moment of this recording as well. So we had an electric lawnmower because it was just more affordable. But this lawnmower was really bulky and heavy and hard to turn. So I mow a row on the lawn, and then I turn the lawnmower to mow some more, and I felt this incredibly sharp pain in the center of my chest, and it hurt. I figured that I had pulled a muscle trying to move the lawnmower around, and it got to the point where I couldn't finish mowing the lawn. It hurt that much.
Mm.
So I was able to get the lawnmower at least in the backyard, and I went inside and I took some pain medication, and the pain eventually went away unless I lifted anything with my right arm. I'm left-handed, so I don't tend to lift a lot with my right arm, but occasionally I will. So it was just this persistent dull pain, like, ooh, yeah, that hurts. The rest of the time, it wasn't bothering me, unless I
Were you
just use. Go
were
ahead.
you by yourself, Michael?
I
Was
know.
there a lot of people
Yeah,
home?
yeah. My
Okay.
family was there and all of that kind of stuff. Explained the situation, and yeah, I wasn't experiencing any other symptoms or anything like that. And proceeded on through the week. And again, occasionally, anytime I used my right arm, I'd have that pain, and I thought, okay, but it wasn't too bad. It wasn't bothering me too much. So I'm like, okay, I'm just going to let it sit for a few days. Working in healthcare, one of the things that they tell you, especially in primary care, is in often situations when you're coming down with something where it's like a sore throat or an ache or a pain or something like that, unless it's significant, wait a few days and see, because if it's prolonged, then okay, there'll be something to deal with it. If it's just something that's going to bother you for a day or so, well, there's no need to go to the doctor about that, because it's going to take care of itself. And that's what I had pretty much thought was going on with me. Thursday night of that week, went out to dinner at a local restaurant, and they had an all-you-can-eat special, and I took them up on that offer. And it was a bunch of fried, greasy, horribly not good for you, but tastes really good food. So I had a bunch of that and washed it down with a few adult beverages as well. And it was a great evening and all of that. And went home and turned in and went to bed. And then about an hour after I went to sleep, I woke up with that same pain that I had on the previous Monday evening, but it was at least 10 times worse.
Mm.
It felt like an elephant was stepping on my chest. And I sat up, got my breath, and realized, or thought anyway, it's like, okay, well, that's all the food coming back to yell at you for eating, that bad food. So I figured it was acid indigestion and all that. So I took some Tums and was able to fall asleep. Friday morning, I go into the office, again, working in a medical clinic. And that pain that I'd been feeling anytime I lifted my right arm was persistent. I was feeling it the whole time. And I'm thinking, okay, it's not normal for Tums to not work and you have gas or indigestion the next day, several hours afterwards. Usually your body works through it. So after working for about 45 minutes, I reached out to one of our physicians and I asked, I kind of talked to him about what had transpired for the week. And he listened to me and he said, okay, well, let's check it out. So he lifted up my shirt, he listened to my chest and all that stuff. And he goes, it's probably nothing, but we've got EKG equipment here in the clinic. So why don't we, run a couple tests just to make sure there's nothing out of the ordinary. I'm like, okay, that's fine. So I go back into the procedure room and our nurse is there, our physician, one of our medical assistants as well. And they're all in there and they're all laughing hysterically. The reason why they were laughing is because their boss was taking his clothes off in front of them. And they were making all kinds of fun jokes and all that and having a big time with it. And I'm as red as a tomato. I'm embarrassed by this because, like, you're not supposed to take your clothes off in front of coworkers. That's not typical in the workforce. But here I am. And after all of that, the doctor finally said, okay, we've had enough fun with them. Okay, let's go ahead and run the test. So they hook up all the electrodes and run the test on me. And they look at the results and they're like, this looks really weird. So I thought, well, let's disconnect all the electrodes and let's run the test again. Maybe there's something, the wiring is a little strange on the equipment because we hadn't run it too often. So they did everything again. They hooked up in different spots and they ran the test again and they got the same results.
Hmm.
So they took the results and they faxed them off to a hospital in Windsor. And Dr. Gina, who was one of the cardiologists at the hospital, called back after a few minutes and said, tell Michael to get his butt in the hospital right now and he cannot drive. I had a pretty significant heart attack and I had 2 blockages in my left anterior descending artery, which has a nickname. It's called the Widowmaker. Because typically if you have blockages in that artery and you have a heart attack, you don't survive. Okay. Now that was May 2009. It is October 2021 at the time of this recording. Still here. Very, very fortunate to be here. I know that. And even my cardiologist, Dr. Morsi, who had put the stents in my left anterior descending artery, I've got 2 stents in there that opened the artery up and cleared the blockages, got cleared out and all of that. Before he did the procedure, he introduces himself and he looks at me and he goes, you should be dead right now. And I kind of look at him and I said, I see you skipped bedside manner class in medical school.
That's supposed to inspire me?
Yes. Yeah. And he laughed. I laughed because I was, I'm like, okay. Yeah. Sorry to disappoint. I'm here. So he did the procedure and everything turned out fine. And I'm here today. But that heart attack kicked off what I call my year of worst case scenarios. So 17 weeks later, after recovering from my cardiac event, I go back to a job and the organization decided they wanted to go in a different direction. So they let me go. And I'd made
bedside manner.
Yeah. Well, I had made some mistakes at work that the organization had felt, were significant enough to make a change. Okay. And I've got a non-disclosure, so I don't go into it. They packaged me out, so yeah, it was, they kicked me in the butt and handed me money as they were kicking. So, so that worked out. But the problem was being unemployed in the Windsor, Ontario area. For those that aren't familiar with the geographic nature of that area, It's across the border from Detroit, Michigan. This is 2009. Everybody remember the Great Recession?
Mm.
Uh, GM, Ford, and Chrysler were in deep trouble. The government had to bail out GM and Chrysler.
Right.
Otherwise, they would have gone out of business, and there would have been millions upon millions of people impacted, not just the work for those organizations, but all the companies, the parts suppliers, the companies in those communities, all of them would have been impacted if the
Yeah,
government didn't bail
devastated.
them out.
Yeah.
So needless to say, not many jobs to be found at that particular time because there was tons of layoffs and all of that. And it took me several months to find a new role, which required a relocation to Toronto. So here I am. I'm looking for jobs, going on interviews and all of that kind of stuff. Finally find a job in Toronto and move up there. Family's still back in Windsor because I was commuting back and forth. And I was up in this new role for a couple of weeks. And it was an afternoon, and my oldest daughter, who was 10 at the time, calls me at work, and she's crying, and I couldn't understand a thing she was saying until was able to get from her finally that the bank had come and repossessed our family vehicle. When you have a heart attack and then you lose your job and you don't have a job and you're looking for a job, anybody that's ever been on unemployment knows your income is not the same. The coverage is not the same amount. So your ability to pay bills is impacted that way. On top of the fact that I was on a bunch of new medication that cost me $1,000 a month. I had no insurance coverage. So it was $1,000 a month for this medication. It's going to impact your ability to pay your bills. Now, we had worked with all of our creditors and they had given us a grace period. But again, remember, Great Recession, there was a lot of people not paying their bills. So there was only so much that they could do. And ultimately, we ran out of time, and the bank exercised the right to take the vehicle back. No hard feelings with that bank. I still bank with them. So I'm not, I was never mad at them about the situation. We had an agreement. I did not live up to the agreement. They exercised the right in the contract to take the vehicle back, which they did. So we have that. And then a couple of weeks later, finally find a place for us to rent. And we move the family up to Toronto and we unpack everything. We realize, whoops, we forgot the bunk bed ladder for our daughter's bed. So I was going back to the house the next weekend and visit with family and friends because we were going to be listing it for sale. And had a good visit with some family and friends, swung by the house to go get the ladder and anything else that we may have forgotten. And I open up the front screen door. I see the largest padlock I've ever seen in my life. You can't buy this padlock at Home Depot. The only place that has these types of locks are banks and foreclosure places. And there was a small sticker on the door that said foreclosure. Our house had gone into foreclosure and we had not received any mail. It wasn't a case where we were getting last chance type of notes. For some reason, those never made it to us. I'm not sure why, but we never were tipped off that, okay, they're going to repossess this house.
I know. So it was a complete surprise. You
It
opened the
was a
door and
shock
said,
on that.
"What?"
Exactly. I was not prepared for that. So over a year, a period of 369 days, so May 2009 to May 2010, heart attack that should have killed me, lost my job during the Great Recession, car repossessed, home foreclosure, all in a year. And all those things happened because I was burned out. My burnout, my poor life choices, mistakes at work, all of those things, all came to a crashing halt in a very, very short period of time. And I say this, and a lot of people look at me crazy when I do. It was the best thing that could have ever happened to me because it did give me an opportunity for a second chance and an opportunity for me to take a really long, hard look at who I was, how I was living, with the acknowledgement that, yeah, maybe the path that I was choosing and the way that I was approaching things in life and work might not be in the best interest for me, and gave me an opportunity to rebuild. And before we continue, I want to frame something on this really quick. I did have to reinvent my life. If people that have known me for a long time know that the version of me today is not the same person that I was prior to those 369 days. For the majority of people, you do not need to reinvent your life. You got to make a couple adjustments here and there that'll make a big difference. But for me, it did require a complete reinvention because the way I was going about life and my beliefs, my habits, my thoughts, and everything else that was going on in my life just wasn't good for me,
Mm.
and it nearly killed me.
So let me ask you, thanks for sharing that, by the way. And let me ask you a few questions that you mentioned. Well, first I'll ask about startups. Like, what attracted you to startups in the first place? Because those, you mentioned that you worked for a lot of startups. That was interesting to the folks who hired you at the healthcare place, which I think was a startup as well. Yeah, I've found that there's, in the world, there are people who are attracted to startups, and there are people who are repelled by
Mm.
startups. And you were attracted. What was the reason?
For me, I've always been a systems guy, a design guy. I mean, behind me, you'll see a poster, a little thing that says I have CDO, which is OCD, but the letters are in alphabetical order as they should be. Um, I like order. I like design. I like structure. That's a tongue in cheek kind of thing now. I'm not that way now. I can thank my better half for that, because if I had a big CD collection, she would be the one to reorganize them so they wouldn't be in alphabetical order, and I would just give up because she just isn't that way. So that's why we get along so well. She's the opposite of me in a lot of different ways. It's unique. But for me, getting back to your question, the ability to design something, to build something from nothing and get it into something where it will actually do something, and an organization that can work and do things, was always exciting for me, because I had worked for organizations that had been around for a long time. They were structured, rigid, hard to move, hard to change on anything. And I thought, okay, let's try some startups, and because you get to have input in how things are. And it was always exciting. And the same thing with the healthcare thing, even though I knew nothing about healthcare and running an organization like that. And it was a huge, huge learning curve for me. But I had mentors and a variety of other people that were well intentioned as far as guiding me. Upon reflection, maybe there was some things that could have been done differently, but uh, it's in the past, so I don't lose sleep over it. But it was always one of those things where it's like, yeah, let's do a startup. And even launching my own business, obviously was a startup, and my experience was good. I think I focused on, okay, what am I going to not do first? Let's make sure I'm clear on those
Mhm.
things, and do periodic check-ins and go, okay, what am I doing right now? Do I still want to do that? And even, as we were talking before, I had taken a couple months sabbatical off, towards the tail end of the summer this year, where I basically just put everything on autopilot or delegated out certain things that I normally would do, or I just, didn't do them for a couple months. And that was structured and set up well in a year in advance. Like, okay, how do I have this thing run without me, and have it be successful and address the things that needs to be done? So, and it worked, more or less. Still picking up a couple pieces here and there, but it's not a big deal. But again, launching your own business and being an entrepreneur, there's a lot of opportunities where you do everything. So if you don't do something, well, it's not going to get done. And how's that going to impact things? So I knew that was going to be an issue, so I made sure that I had systems in place and outsource some things, to make sure that things would continue to move and rotate while I was taking a break from things.
Sure. And so I started my first business when I was 26, Michael,
Mhm.
and I think my approach to it, while it was not 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. 7 days a week, my approach to it was more aligned with your initial approach to things, which is, I just, I can work harder, I can put in more time, I can learn what I need to learn, I don't need help, all of these things, everything that I couldn't do on my own, I thought I needed to, because if I didn't, it would show the world that I was lazy or dumb or, some other pejorative term. but you know, one of the things that I've learned over the years is, you know, I pretty much got what I designed to get. You know, I put a system in place. Maybe it wasn't a CDO system, but it was a system that I put in place that rewarded me with exactly the result that I designed it to. You know, where I was tired, I call it dropping into the uncertainty valley. So I dropped off a cliff after like 10 years, not with the same, you know, collection of events that you went through in that 369-day period. But one of the things that interested me about what you were saying about the time you were working is you used the word required,
Mm.
and I wonder if it just got my attention. So I wonder, was it really required, Michael, or was it what you felt you needed to do in order to make people happy or succeed or whatever the case may be?
It was definitely a situation of people pleasing,
Okay.
a lack of boundaries around when I would work and when I wouldn't. Uh, and you mentioned something a moment ago about I'll work harder. And that's a common trap that people that burn out or really overwhelmed do. They say, well, I'll just work through this. And that's the last thing you need to be doing. You actually need to work less and take a step back and literally take a 30,000-foot view of what you're doing. I had a conversation earlier today with a consultant, and one of the things that he had brought up was so many of us are horrible and keeping track of how we spend our time, and we just overload and overcommit ourselves, and that's what I did. And I even recall a conversation that I had with a consultant that we had working with us during that time that was leading up to the 369 days. And he had warned me. He said, you need to take a step back a little bit. But there was a lot of drive in that. And I see a lot of type A personalities can be more prone to burnout than others, but it really doesn't matter. Anybody can burn out if they're not taking care of themselves and
Mhm.
doing things rightly. But I found that myself, I was driven. I wanted to prove uh, to the community, to the board of directors, to the physicians, the staff, that we're going to make this clinic amazing and we're going to do some great things. And subsequently, since I've left, they've taken care of that community quite well, which I'm thankful for. And ironically, majority of the people that I had hired are still there, and I hired them in
Mhm.
2007. That's a long time,
Yeah.
especially in this world, for someone to stay. There are definitely opportunities for those people to go somewhere else, but they're still there, which is amazing. Speaks to their character and the work that's being done there. But again, for me, and I identify as a reformed people pleaser. Again, and that's because you want to do something, but you're doing it for either your ego, or you want to get acknowledgement that you're doing a great job, which can be, maybe there's a self-confidence issue going on, or there could be a variety of other things, other factors, thoughts, beliefs, habits, patterns. That's why I pursued, the CBT and the NLP things. Originally, it was, I'm going to get these designations. Yes, they'll be helpful in the work that I do, but I did it for me first. And
Right.
I'm like, okay, let's see. Okay, why was this important for me? Why did I need to prove? Why do I want people to be happy with the work that I do? And digging into it, and you find some things, and you realize, okay, this was inherited in many ways, of what my parents have done and do. My dad has passed, but my mom's still around, and it's like, okay, I'm seeing traits, and memories are coming back. When you get clarity, and when you're burned out, you have no clarity. You're in a fog. But when you start getting clarity, and you start reflecting and looking at things with clear eyes, and you're in a relaxed state, you start noticing things, and all of a sudden the puzzle pieces start fitting.
Yeah.
Okay, I saw my parents do this. So I thought, okay, that is quote unquote normal, and I should do that. And sometimes that's not exactly the best way to approach things. So ultimately it boiled down, to go back to your original question, it wasn't required. Now, I did have a very proactive um, board president, and the board, for their own reasons, wanted things to be done a certain way. They wanted to make a big impact in the community. They wanted to be viewed as community leaders that brought this amazing clinic to their community to meet a need. And there's ego involved, and I'm not holding anything against them on that. Everyone wants to make their dent in the universe, which is fine, but you can do it without the detriment of the people that work for you and or yourself. And it's one of those things, if you don't have clear boundaries around when you work and when you don't,
Yeah.
it can really be problematic.
And let me, before I get into this reinvention thing a little bit more, I want to explore, if you don't mind, this people pleasing thing, because here's sort of my thoughts on this, and I want to see what if you think the same thing. So I think that leaders, they hear a lot about servant leadership, and they hear about examples of servant leadership, like, oh, the leader always puts him or herself second. They're always, they always want to make sure that everybody has everything they need, or they help everybody that needs to be helped. And I think that's how I took servant leadership to be. And that's what I tried to do. But I think I made a mistake. I think that servant leadership or selfless leadership can only be good if you've had some opportunity to be selfish. And you mentioned the NLP and the CBT. So I think that if you want to call yourself a servant leader and you put everybody else first, you're destined to fail, because you are always going to be people pleasing, and you are almost always, and I'm sure there are exceptions to this with some, unique people, but in my experience, because I'm doing the people pleasing, I convince myself that's really my role instead of leading people. So I'm attaching myself to them so that I'm needed, as opposed to leading. I'd like to get am I crazy with that, or
No, you're spot on. I'm in complete alignment with where you're going with this. And we've heard this phrase, and sometimes we hear it a bit more, is on an airplane, the oxygen mask pop down. You're supposed to put on your oxygen mask first before you help anybody else.
right?
As a leader, it's the same thing. You have to take care of yourself first. You have to in order for you to lead properly, you have to be the best optimal version of yourself. And that means getting proper rest, nutrition, exercise. Um, you have to be clear minded, and rested and energetic, so you can see opportunities, because you're at a different vantage point than anywhere else. There's a book called Maestro. It's from Maestro Roger Nierenberg. He used to lead the New York Philharmonic Orchestra. Now he's a leadership consultant. And I had him on my show years ago, but I love what he does as he goes into organizations, big and small, and he brings a small orchestra with him. And they go into a room, and they have the orchestra set up in a pit type of area. And he has, the people in the organization that he's coaching or consulting sit in with the orchestra. And of course, they're all trying to get coordinated and all that. And originally, when they're playing, it doesn't sound good. Kind of sounds like a third grade band playing for the first time. It's not, it doesn't sound great. And then eventually, they get everything lined up, the harmonies are there, and it sounds really good. And then what he does is he starts bringing up people up to where the conductor stands, which tends to be elevated from there. And They go up there and they play the same music that they've been listening to for several minutes or a couple hours, depending on the situation. And they hear it from the conductor's point of view. And they are blown away and amazed on how dramatically different it is from that vantage point. Same room, same musicians, same notes, same equipment, but it sounds completely different from that vantage point. And that's what leadership is. We see things differently than what we see down there. If we're spending all of our time trying to please and get the admiration and cooperation of our employees, then we're not doing our job as a leader. We're too busy looking down. We need to be looking out. Yes, doesn't mean you ignore your staff. It doesn't mean you don't attend to their needs. But in this is a bigger, deeper situation, you have to make sure that your team is the right team to do what you need them to do. And, one of Tom Peters, one of my favorite leadership guys, and been following him since, the 80s, just to kind of date me a little bit. One of the things that he says is hire slow, fire fast, and very, similar but different. He's a little, less abrasive than Jack Welch was, as far as, he was nicking, you cut the bottom 10%, neutron Jack, just, bottom 10% gone, and kind of thing. And it's like, I'm hybrid in some of those methodologies, but I would prefer to create opportunities for employees to be the best version of themselves, to have everything that they need to be successful, give them all the tools in the direction that they need to do their job, and then get out of the way.
Right.
And the ones that need constant, I don't call it babysitting, but that's the analogy I'm going to use right now. They may not be the right fit for that organization. Doesn't mean personalities or them as a human being. No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about their ability to do the role you need them to do for your organization. And when you're trying to people please your board or your boss or your team, again, you're using all that energy and you're not focusing on you or what the organization needs to do to be successful. And that's it took time for me to learn those lessons, because I wanted people to like me. I wanted to be the favorite boss. Well, now
the hero.
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
it's
to
the
be the
hero's
hero.
journey. You
Right.
want to fly in with a cape or
I'm
do it.
needed. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I found that I need to be the hero to me, and then let everything else will take care of itself if you have the right people in place and all the tools that they need and systems in place for them to be successful, and adjust accordingly.
Yeah. And you're practicing another high level strategy towards that end too, like what you mentioned about taking the sabbatical of sorts, a couple months or whatever, and relying on the team. What a great way to figure out who on the team really is there for the right reasons,
Mhm.
because there's no one here to help you, right? So it's a great way to people talk about empowering their teams all the time. A great way to empower your team and learn a heck of a lot about each of them is to leave for a
Yeah.
while.
Yeah, to take time or to step away, or all those things. One of the
Yeah.
clinics that I used to work for, uh, a receptionist, and again, I'm not diminishing levels or anything like that, but this individual was brought on when we recruited a physician, and she was at a receptionist level, was doing a little bit of office work and whatnot. She's now the CEO of that organization. And I couldn't be happier for her, because one, she had the skill set. Two, the work that she did, I made sure to, keep her abreast of what I was doing, and open, transparent as best you can. So no one knows, there's no surprises with anything. And she was, obviously a sponge to learn some things. And initially she was, office manager, and then interim, and then took the role permanently. And I look at that and I go, I'm thrilled. Did I have a part in it? Maybe. I'll say this. I created the environment where that could be a possibility. It's
Right.
up to the individual to take the opportunities that get presented and do something with them. And that's the greatest thing you can do as a leader, is create an environment where people can thrive in their own way. You're going to have superstars. You're going to have some utility players. Using a baseball analogy, you're going to have somebody that's going to be everyday starter, everyday player, always playing, all that good stuff. Maybe give them a day off here and there. And you're going to have people on the bench that'll fill in. And then you're going to have those people towards the end of the bench that may not use them all the time, but they're there and they're clutch when you need them. They'll fill a role. And when you have a team like that, you'll be successful.
Just as an aside here, you mentioned Tom Peters and sort of that dating you, but I think you got a lot of references in your writing that are sort of, you know, dating you, but they're so cool. Like I was reading through your burnout book, and you referenced Blues Clues, which made me think of my kids when they were young watching
Mhm.
Blues Clues, and then Bob Newhart and 60 Minutes. Even though that's still on, you don't even know anybody who's on that show anymore. You only know the people, if you're a certain age, you only know the people who were on that show for,
Mhm.
30 years or whatever it was, Morley Safer and Mike
Mhm.
Wallace and those guys. So anyway, your writing is kind of really nice how you sprinkle in those references.
Yeah, I do my best try to bring those things in, and of course, I've got younger kids too that can help me with what's going on in the world. I'm not living in a cave by any stretch. I'm aware of what's going on in society and TikTok and Instagram and all the things that are on there. But I always look at it, it's like, okay, is this going to be applicable for my audience or not? And if it is, then I'll put it in there. If it's not, then I won't. And if I'm unsure, then maybe I'll put it in there. And if it lands like a lead balloon, okay, well, we know that didn't work. But yeah, I appreciate the acknowledgement of the thinking chair and Blue's Clues and all the other things.
Right. The the reinvention part. So you had this 369 days that you talked about. Um, Best thing that happened to you in
Mhm.
retrospect.
Mhm.
I've heard a lot of people say that about traumatic things that happened in their life, or certainly unfortunate things. Um, but I'm always interested in, okay, easy to say. When did this? You said you had to change yourself. You had to reinvent yourself. You couldn't go on the way that you did, and now you're helping so many people with that. I'm wondering how did it come to you, if you can remember? How did it come to you, and how did you make the decision? Because in addition to, you know, the health and the job thing and stuff, you've got these financial pressures on you. It's just, that's a deep hole
Right.
that is sometimes very, very difficult for people to climb out of, or to even put energy into reinvention, because they're so putting so much energy into woe is me, what,
Mhm.
um, and real world stuff like, how do we pay the bills? How do we eat?
Right.
How do we do all this stuff? So,
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things for me that helped was that first 17 weeks. Thankfully, we had it at the employer a short term disability policy that was obviously expensive, but that helped with my financial challenges while I was off. And I took the full 17 weeks because I needed to. And during that time, I had obviously was resting. Initially for the first couple of weeks, maybe 2 or 3 weeks, there was one medication, I forget the name of it, but it was basically forcing me to take a nap at 2 o'clock in the afternoon every day. I was 40 years old at the time, and normally I would take naps in the fall on a Saturday during college football season. I'd sit in the recliner, you know, and watch some games. I'd end up falling asleep, wake up, around 3:45. So the first round of games were off. So I had no idea who won any of the games. So I had to go back and, go online, see who won and all of that kind of good stuff. So, but that's typically the only time I'd ever really take a nap. Well, this medication was literally, forcing me. If I was sitting up like this, it, I basically have a 10-minute warning. Otherwise, I would be off and done.
okay.
And I went to my doctor. I'm like, no, I can't have this. Is there something else? Because this is a nasty side effect that I'm not happy with. So he, got me on a different med, and everything was fine after that. But that time allowed me to relax, for one, because I obviously wasn't relaxing, wasn't taking time off. I wasn't doing things I like to do. So I started easing back into doing some leisure things, reading, for example, something that I love to do. And I had not read in a long, long time, up to my cardiac event, because I didn't have time. Or did I have the attention span to actually sit down and start reading a book? So that was a big thing for me. And it gave me opportunities to go, okay, once I was ready to start looking at my life and going, okay, what caused all of this? Excuse me. What was my actions that put me into these situations? What was my responsibility? I didn't want to play the blame game. I didn't want to play the victim, and I never did in all of this. And I know a lot of people unfortunately do. Like you mentioned, that's a deep hole to go into when you have all of those things happen.
Mhm.
I think one of the reasons why I was able to survive, if you want to use that word, all those subsequent losses was I had moved on from the previous one. I had grown from it and realized, okay, I nearly lost my life, but I'm still here. Okay, let me start taking better care of myself. Let's start making better choices around what I eat. Start getting a little bit more active. Let's not take things so personally. All of those things had a big, big part in helping me start to heal from, a very long time of, traumatizing myself, quite frankly. So that was a big part of it. Next, I think was, again, and it took me, this was not something overnight, especially the people pleasing acknowledgement. That took several years to get my head wrapped around it, because I didn't spend a lot of time on it until I started seeing some behaviors and traits in myself, again through the studies of CBT and NLP, that it kind of caught me off guard. It was like, ooh, wait a minute. And I started looking back at some situations or experiences that I had and realized, okay, I didn't put myself first in that situation. I basically delegated my well-being to address that situation and put myself into either harm or maybe not the best of situations, and recognized, okay, that's lesson learned. Let's not do that again. And so it, as much as I would love to say that it was an overnight fix, no, to this day, I'm still, learning about myself and experiences, and catching myself. I'm obviously a lot more aware of things than I was, when I was going through that experience, and even shortly afterwards. But ultimately, it was a case of, when you have somebody that's in their 40s, you can't expect to completely reinvent your life in a few months
Yeah,
or
30
even in a
days.
couple of
30
years.
days to change a habit, right? Yeah.
Yes, 30 days to change a habit. Okay. Your thoughts, your beliefs, your habits, your thought patterns, belief, all these things, those have decades in you. So, when I tell people, or they're saying, well, I want to lose 20 pounds. Well, unless you put that 20 pounds on in the last couple of months, don't expect to lose it in a couple of months. It's going to take some time. And yeah, sure, you can do, a weight cut loss type of thing like the fighters do to make weight before their matches, but you're going to gain that right back the next day.
Right.
You want something sustainable. So that means you have to do something sustained, slow, methodical, and unfortunately society doesn't like slow and methodical. They like, why isn't this done? How come I'm not that way? I did a push-up. How come, my chest isn't chiseled? What's going on? It's like, yeah,
Yeah.
you did one. You're gonna have to do more than that for a longer period of time, and also there's some nutrition and all kinds of other things you got to factor in. It's believe me, the quick fix thing is not quick.
Yeah.
um,
If you want quick, then if you gain a pound, take a pound off. and then you don't have to worry about,
Exactly.
you know,
Yeah,
the compounding effect of not doing something for a long time, whether it's weight
exactly.
or anything else for that matter.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is probably a softball question, but how does, what's the difference between stress and burnout, and how does someone know? You say in your book, you know, you don't wake up one day and say, "Oh, I'm burned out." You know, it's something you don't realize, I
Right.
suppose, for a long period of time. But I hear way more people talk about I'm stressed out than I
Mhm.
am burned out, and I'm wondering what the difference is in your mind between the two. Let's start there, and then I want to get more into how you've created this system to help people with burnout.
Sure. I'll start with this. Burnout happens with unaddressed prolonged stress. So you have to have stress. Stress is a component of burnout, but it has to be
Okay.
prolonged. You're overwhelmed. You're physically and mentally drained. You're just not able to keep up with life. And you know, a segue question for a second is a lot of people say, well, that sounds like depression. Depression and burnout have a lot of similarities. The biggest difference between the two of them is if you're clinically depressed, many times you are not able to function in life at all. You can't get out of bed, you can't do anything. When you're burned out, somehow, some way you're able to muster up enough energy to go out and function. Maybe not your best, but you're still able to do it. There's still
Okay.
a lot of research going into this. You know, the World Health Organization, prior to the pandemic, had actually issued an ICD code for burnout, identifying it as a workplace phenomenon. It's because it's such a huge, huge issue. But to answer your question, stress happens when there's your expectations and outcomes aren't in alignment, and the situation is, you know, problematic. For example, you get stressed out, you know, from, you know, physical stress, you know, working out, or, you know, exerting yourself too much. There's stress from relationships. There's stress from long hours at work because you don't have enough people to work for you, or there's stress because there's a pandemic and you can't go to a concert, or you have to wear a mask, or you can't do this, and people get stressed about that. We're not too far removed from a presidential election. Very stressful. Doesn't matter who you voted for. That was a stressful period of time for a lot of people, and
In both countries, by the
in
way.
both you know, both countries,
Yeah.
and across the globe
Right.
as well. You know, because a lot of people are going, what direction
Yeah.
is the
Yeah.
U.S. going to go, and that will dictate as to, you know, relations, trade, all kinds of different things. So you know, there's good stress, you know, like the physical stress, you know, where you can, you know, lose some weight and exercise, and but you know, there's also obviously the emotional stress and financial stress, and um, you know, physical stress. Intolerance is one of the things I have people do. Is, and it's obviously a lot more available now than it used to be, is a food intolerance test. And I just recently
Mm.
had one, and I was tested on over 250 foods. And I know some I have a distinct allergy to, and some I was quite surprised to see on the list that I have intolerance to. I'm like, I didn't know that. But the reason why that's so important is for me to phase out some of those foods from my diet allows my gut to work on foods that aren't quote unquote bad for me, which means my gut is healthier, which means the bacteria is creating is better, which means my body will be healthier, which means I get a better night's sleep. If you get a
Yeah.
good night's sleep, that's the magic pill, quite frankly, of dealing with stress and everything else in life. If you're not getting good sleep, it has such a huge ripple effect on your life and every aspect of it. If you're getting good sleep and restful sleep, then your ability to navigate through stress is easier because you don't take so many things personally. Okay, a stressful situation at work, you still have some clarity and ability to kind of keep yourself in check to navigate through those challenging situations. If you're run down and you haven't been sleeping for a while, then you're going to be edgy, you're going to be tense, Your body's not going to be feeling good. You're not going to be as clear headed. Your ability to problem solve and recognize patterns is impacted. And of course, that has uh, the opportunity to make things a lot more challenging for you, which of course creates you some stressful situations because again, you're not able to see things clearly. So it has this domino effect where it can really make things problematic. So you can't eliminate stress, but you can gear yourself up to be able to navigate with stress a lot easier if you're getting good sleep, taking care of yourself, you're doing things in life you enjoy, you're being somewhat active. I'm not telling everybody to go join a gym and all of that, but if it works for you, go for it. But ultimately, there's things you can do in your life that can make you healthier. And if you're healthier, then you'll be able to navigate through stressful situations easier.
And when you, so that was interesting because you mentioned earlier that you had to reinvent yourself, but that most people only need to make a few changes or different choices. I can't remember the exact word you used, Michael. So
Mhm.
the people that come to you, or who are the people that should come to you? Who are the people that you can help? What do they have to, I don't know, where do they have to be, or what's the realization they have to come to you, and what do you do with them?
That's a great way to put it. I think the biggest thing is they have to recognize that the way that things are for them is not the way that they want to be. And knowing that there may be some work involved for them to uh, get clear on why they burned out. You can stop burnout a lot faster than a lot of people think. They think, okay,
Mhm.
burnout is like this treadmill you can't get off. No, you can actually stop burnout fairly quickly if you do certain things. Number one, get good sleep. Number two, eat the foods that are right for you. There's some people that as crazy as it sounds, fast food actually is good for them in a weird sort of way. The way their body and makeup and all that stuff, it doesn't bother them and they feel better when they eat it. Oh, I'm not to judge, but getting an understanding again what foods are good for you is important, and that's not just going and grabbing a book at a bookstore. No, you need to get tested. Figure out what kind
Absolutely.
of food intolerances and
Yeah.
allergies, and then that way build your nutrition plan around the foods that give you the natural energy and you feel good. Because again, if you're feeling good, you're sleeping well, that helps a lot. And a big thing too is have boundaries around when you work and when you don't, and that's been challenging with this pandemic because especially people working from home, they didn't really have any boundaries around when they started working and when they stopped. They'd get up in the morning and work throughout the night, and oh, congratulations, so many of us became full-time school teachers during the pandemic as
Mhm.
well, so we're doing that and then working into the night in order to cover up for the time we lost for all of that stuff. So it's made for big challenging times, but you know making sure that you're doing things in life you enjoy doing. And it's not about work life balance. You cannot balance your work in your life. It's like balancing an egg. Good luck. It's not going to happen. You have to harmonize things. You have to integrate your life. You're one person. You don't, there's not a work you and a home you. I mean, yeah, we do, behaviors and patterns might be different, but we're still just one. So
Yeah.
integrating those things, understanding that there's going to be periods of time where you're going to be working a little bit more hours or maybe have a little bit more vacation time. It ebbs and flows, and getting your head wrapped around that and figuring out how to do that is a big help. But again, going back to your original question, understanding and a willingness to learn, I think, is a big thing, because I've encountered people in teams that, well, this is this and this is, and they lay down all these ingredients and they won't budge on them. I'm like, okay, we want this wagon to be a different color, but it has to be red. Can't work with you on that one.
Right.
Just can't. It's like the red might be the right color for that wagon, but we have to explore and see if there's other options for that. That's a silly example, but that's kind of the rigidness that I've experienced sometimes, because I worked with a lot of C-suite executives. And they're like, it has to be this way. I'm like, okay, you're already in this should, and you just start shoulding all over yourself. And it's like,
Mhm.
no, don't. You have to be a little bit more open-minded about this. What if, it's like when we learned how to ride a bike, we fell down, we skinned ourselves up pretty good. Some of us rode bikes without a helmet, and it shows. Yeah, I'm kidding, but but at the end of the day, we learned how to ride the bike. Yes, we're going to get scrapes along the way. That's what life's all about. Those are experiences. It's not
Mhm.
all smooth sailing. But again, being open to it, and understanding, because people say, well, I can't do the that's like, well, okay, well, yeah, you're right, you can't. And they look at me like, what do you mean I can't? You just told me you can't. That's not what I meant. Well, you're programming the language you're using with yourself, your thoughts, your beliefs, your habits are creating these scenarios. So let's take a look at why is this important? Why do you do it this way? Why do you go about this? Why do you do this at work? Why does things have to be this way? And not in an accusational way, just to get them to start looking and understanding, okay, why do I have my assistant set up my schedule this way? Does it make sense? Is it just something you inherited from your boss or what? And it's a little bit deeper dive, but the key thing is, a lot of it is, are you willing to become self-aware? Because
Mhm.
often people that are burned out and stressed out, they're not self-aware. They're like, I'm stressed. Why are you stressed? I don't know. Hmm. Okay. I'm being a little sarcastic here. I don't normally be that way unless I know the person well enough. Then all bets are off. But I do it with care, of course. But ultimately, you want to figure out, okay, well, we need to figure out why, because that will help you see things in a way where you can, potentially make an adjustment here or there on a situation. Um, a lot of times people think, well, I'm just gonna have to quit my job and go to a new job. It'll be less stressful. I look at that as running away.
Right.
It really is.
Yeah.
Because you're going to go to the same type of company or same type of environment with the same type of boss. It's just, you're just going to, because you subconsciously, for some reason, you're attracted to that type of situation. Same thing with people in dating and relationships. They're always dating the same model. Yeah, it's like, okay, you went with the 2022 Corvette this time instead of the 2017 Corvette. Still a Corvette, and you don't like Corvettes.
Right.
Okay, great. Save some money, buy the Lambo instead. Whatever the case may be. But again, it's getting them to kind of take a step back and look at themselves in a non-judgmental way. That's what's so important. We're so hard on ourselves, and you're not going to get anywhere if you're beating yourself up. But you've already done a great job doing that already. Let's not continue that path. Let's take a step back and go, okay, this is why I feel this way. Why am I doing things this way? Why is it important to me for this? Why do I want to prove myself in the community this way? Why is that important to you?
Yeah.
And and there's an exercise that you do in a lot of therapies where they call it chunking up and chunking down, and it's helping the person kind of ask themselves the deeper questions to get a little bit more clarity or self clarity on where they are and what they're doing. And when you do that, they go, and they start getting a little aware of, okay, and then they start doing that exercise in other areas, and then it's to the point where they really start getting fully aware why they do some things, and that's where they can go, well, do I want to continue down that path, or do I want to do something a little bit different with it? And results may vary depending on what they want to do, but
Mhm.
ultimately it's, again, going back to your original question, is, are you willing to take a deep dive and look at how you've done things in as caring of a way as possible? And if you are, then yeah, we can do the deeper work, because that's where the deep work is figuring out why you burned out in the first place, so you can
Right.
prevent it from
But
happening
not
again.
happen again. Right. So
Yeah,
you can
if you
see
if,
the
if
signs. You can.
Yeah, if you don't want to do that deep work, then just get the better sleep, eat better, all that kind of stuff, and that will help, but it won't prevent it from happening again. Ultimately, my goal is I want you to live a life where you don't burn out again. I was burned out once, should have killed me. Not flirting with that again. So that's why I had to do a lot of deep work and realized things that I needed to adjust and change, and I did. And here we are today.
And here you are. Michael, it's been so much fun to have you on the podcast. I loved what you said about work-life balance and harmony, and it sort of brought the orchestra back into my mind, and because you talked about that earlier. And, sometimes in the orchestra, you're the lead and you gotta, you are, it's all on you, and everybody else is playing backup. And sometimes you're the backup and there's another lead. So, people want to go 50% work, 50%, home life. I always wonder, geez, I don't know how you're ever going to construct something like that. It's actually going to lead to more stress, I think, trying to structure something like that than saying, I've got this much time. Sometimes I'm going to have to, really put the pedal to the metal sort of thing. And sometimes I'll be able to ease off. That's the way the world works, both in work life and in personal life and family
Absolutely.
life or whatever.
Absolutely.
So thanks for sharing your story. I wish you didn't have to go through it to have the realizations that you've had, but like most of us in life, if we don't go through something like that, the chances that we have those realizations and then channel those realizations as you have to help other people through the work you're doing, it just doesn't happen. So,
Exactly.
Pain works. Sometimes pain
No
works.
pain, no pain, no gain, as they
Right,
like to
no
say.
pain,
Yeah.
no gain. So how do you, I mentioned your websites and stuff at the beginning. Is there a different way or some other way you want people to connect with you?
Yeah, like I said, the breakfastleadership.com website is a good place to go. I'm on most of social media channels if you look up breakfast leadership or hashtag breakfast leadership, you should be able to find me. I'm on LinkedIn and Instagram and Twitter and all those other places. So it should be easy to find me.
Okay. Sounds good. I found you easy enough, and I've enjoyed getting to know you a little bit better. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the How'd It Happen podcast, where we believe that success doesn't happen unless you make it happen. You can subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you like to listen. And while you're there, please rate it and leave a comment as well. I'd love to hear your thoughts about the show, ideas for future guests, or whatever you'd like to share. And of course, you can always find me at MikeMalatesta.com. See you next time. Thanks again for listening to the How'd It Happen podcast.